Welcome to Coalition Purple. Hey, we're still standing
Yeah.
as of 2 days after the election.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen.
Well, the interesting thing about our elections, is that nothing can happen for another 2.5 months.
Right?
So, I mean, it's like, yeah, the election happened, but there actually hasn't been the handoff of power or anything. So basically, we're still where we were. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of months.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I thought about in terms of the third party piece, I was thinking maybe, I mean, anybody can do it, I guess. Why don't we declare November 5th Independence Day, not Independence Day? That's July 4th is Independence. And the reason why I say that is I think what was interesting about the election was everybody kept saying it was going to be close, it's going to be close, but nobody really had a clue what was going to happen. And actually, I was surprised that Trump won by the margin that he did. Um, and I'm just going to say the independents should take credit for that. It's like because it was like really the polls really don't indicate anything anymore. It's
No.
like and I think it's just such a symptom of obviously a much larger issue of people are just so ambivalent, and there's going to be a lot of finger pointing for a while that you should have done. Kamala should have done this, or Trump was, a genius and did that, and all. And at the end of it, I don't think anybody really knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. My big takeaway was, well, first of all, I guess I would say that I felt that Trump would either win in a landslide or lose in a close race. I didn't think
Yeah, right,
I didn't think if it was close. I didn't think it was close that he'd win. But if it got, like he won the popular vote, so I mean that pretty
right.
much put an end to all the shenanigans that may or may not have occurred, anywhere along the line. But I think the interesting thing that's going to come out of this is the whole Democrats aligning themselves with the people like the Cheneys.
Yeah,
Because I've always said that the way you make a third party is you take all the moderates away from the Democrats and the Republican, and you form that into a coalition,
yep,
and you essentially have a moderate party, and then you're left with essentially an abortion party on the right or an anti-abortion party on the right, and the socialist communist party on the left, and then the moderates are in the middle. But after watching this election and seeing Harris campaigning with Cheney, it occurred to me that another way that you could create a third party would be to essentially disgorge all the waste out of the Republican Party and just let it go off and fester somewhere, and that could be a party. And then the Republican Party, I guess, would remain, but remain as something that's actually palatable for the majority of people.
right.
I don't know if a scenario like that is actually possible. I've always sort of rejected that because I don't think the Republican Party particularly wants to reform.
No,
So,
not
you
now,
know,
not for at this point. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it all comes down to naming convention, right? So
yeah,
all the non-Trumpers, they they may not be able to call themselves Republicans anymore. They can call themselves something else versus trying to retake the Republican Party because I think that's a useless battle
yeah.
at this
But
point.
because it's interesting because I've said that this before, during the course of the election, is what comes next. Because you knew this election was going to be contentious and there was something that was going to happen one way or the other. And so now we have Trump for 4 years, but then what after that? Because
Right,
the Republicans don't have another Trump. Trump is just Trump.
right,
And then so do they go back to being the Republican Party that nobody wants?
right,
And or what happens with the Democrats? I mean, if the Democrats are going to attempt to absorb disaffected Cheney Republicans, what does that party look like? I mean, that's
yeah.
just
No,
a mess.
I don't know. I don't see that happening. But I mean, who knows these days?
Yeah,
It's just like
seriously.
I'm surprised that Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney came out as they did. So okay, go figure. so
Yeah.
and but I mean, I think that would be an anathema for a lot of Democrats to a lot of the far left Democrats to ever get in bed with the Cheneys of the world. Because, I mean, there's just so much distrust and hatred and all that kind of stuff for things that have gone on over the years.
Yeah.
But I do see moderates. I, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being way too optimistic, but I'm hoping, again, that's why I called it independent. Hopefully, we'd have an Independence Day as of celebrate every November now, and to get people thinking, because obviously there was a lot of independent thinking going on
Right.
when you consider what was it, 6 out of the 8 states or something that had abortion on the ballot. They've gone back to basically approving Roe at the state level, and the ones that didn't, where it didn't pass, they have the whole, got to pass by 60% rule, and which
Mhm.
is never going to happen in most of those places. But yet those states that approved abortion also voted for Trump. So it's like
Yeah.
it's just such a mixed bag, and just nobody's everything's upside down and sideways, like I said before. And so I don't know. It's going to be an interesting 4 years, and then at least because I have a lot of Democrats that live around me. That I keep reminding them, hey, remember that in Trump's first term, they had a clean sweep. Basically, they owned everything, right? They had the House, the Senate, and Trump, and they got squat done. So, and now it may be a little bit different now, that's because he kind of knows what he's doing, a little bit better organized and all that. But I think there's still so many fractures in a lot of the way they think, and there's just enough Democrats going to be around just to throw a wrench in the works, that at least for the first couple of years, it's going to be a challenge, and they got a lot of things on their plate that they're going to have to deal with. It's like, okay, you're gonna drive down prices. Okay, let's see how that works,
Yeah.
because it's really hard to drive prices down once they've gone up.
Yeah. Well, as they say, a lot of good governance, as it turns out, I would say, is lessening the decline. So, like, it's not so much that you're going to bring the cost of prices down. You're not going to bring prices down, but if you stop them from going up as fast, at least that's something.
Right.
It's the same way with a lot of things. I think though. I think the only thing that Trump is really going to do, I mean, legislation wise, I don't think he's going to do much of anything. But I think what he can do is he can get rid of a lot of the fat in the executive branch. And I think he's probably going to want to focus on that. You know, Republicans for years have talked about how they want to get rid of a whole bunch of the various departments and cut them down to size and all those kind of things. And I think Trump has an opportunity to do that now. He's definitely going to go after the Department of Justice. I mean, there's no question about that.
Yeah, you think?
So, I
Well, I
mean,
think I was going to say the only other thing I think that he will have an impact, and it remains to see how much, is obviously with the Supreme Court and things like that, because
yeah,
a couple of those folks probably can now retire, and he can replace them with right leaning justices.
yeah,
So again, all the Democrats or more progressive folks have to just buckle in and realize you're going to deal with a conservative court for a pretty long time.
yeah. Yeah, the interesting thing about the court is the two elder statesmen on the court are Alito and Thomas, I think.
Thomas. Yeah.
So you basically swap them out, so that's just
Yeah.
a status quo. But the next person likely to change is Sotomayor, and if she changes during this 4 year period, then
Yeah.
that's a sea change.
Right. But even if it keeps basically the same makeup for the next 4 years, I mean, it's going to go beyond 4 years, because those two, most likely, I would think, would probably leave the court in the next 4 years so they can get replaced. So that means however long Sotomayor stays on, um, it's going to kind of keep the same kind of framework for quite a while.
Yeah,
But there again, goes back to term limits for Supreme Court judges. I'm
yeah,
all for it.
yeah. No, I don't really have a beef with that. But the one thing that also I think is interesting though is so much of the talk about the Supreme Court and the way the Supreme Court is right or left or this and that over the years has all centered around Roe.
Oh yeah,
And
a lot of it for sure.
Now that Roe is gone, what really is the left right issue that people are really up in arms about that they think that the court is going to do anything about?
Well, I guess I don't know if it's right left issue or not, but the whole campaign funding thing, which I seems like more Democrats are in favor of kind of restoring what happened after Citizens United, trying to put some controls in place. I mean, that should be kind of a bipartisan thing, you would think,
But I
but
would
again,
say,
it's not a societal issue, generally speaking. To your point,
and I would look at the makeup of the court, and I would say like I couldn't tell you what any of those justices would be likely to vote on something like that.
yeah. Well, I mean, and at this point, it's not to say that you. It's really not in the court's hands any longer. They've made the
Right.
decision. You can basically spend whatever you want. Um, and so it's going to come down to some legislation, and legislation's not going anywhere. So
Right.
it's a moot issue to begin with. But from a societal thing, I all I can think of is again, I still think this controversy over how much immunity a president should have is going to be a big question mark. But and that at this point is a probably a political issue. But flip side of it is hey, who knows? For 8 years down the road, a Democrat could do some funky things, and then maybe the Republicans will get on board with it then.
Yeah. Well, I would say that from my perspective, uh, first of all, one of the things that Trump needs to do is he needs to look into all the lawfare stuff that happened. Because if you actually look at the cases that were brought against him, they were basically garbage. And they were all brought within like the same few, like 1 month span of time. I mean, if you look at the way things happened and the way they went down and the way they got brought up, Trump announces for president, and then like within a month, he's charged in all these different districts with all these different things. That was clearly a coordinated effort to damage Trump's ability to, run for president. And there's plenty of people, even former Democrats, that have said the same thing. Like, these things would never have been brought against anyone but Trump. And then, when they went to some of the appeals, they were forced to admit that, the charges that they brought have never been brought against anyone anywhere. Totally novel things that they made up to go against Trump.
Yep.
So one thing that Trump must do is ensure that that kind of lawfare never happens again. Because, like, think about it. I mean, right now, as it stands, 2 years from now, whoever the Democrats run, the Republican Department of Justice under Trump could come up with a completely novel charge that no one has ever heard of, and then just start charging his political opponents with it. So not only does Trump need to ban it for the Democrats doing in the future, he needs to ban it so that he can't do it in 2 years. So I
Yeah,
mean,
well, that'll be the interesting part to see how he
right,
approaches that because I mean he has made claims that he is going to go after some people, so which is basically throwing gas on a fire, right? That,
yeah,
but again, all the more reason that I hope more and more people get on board with the third. Again, maybe don't even give up being a Republican or a Democrat, but be thinking more of it as an independent at least get to that point because I was trying an email with a friend of mine who's kind of stressed out about it. And it's like, you know what? We can all sit around and point fingers at to why this should happen or that should happen. But I really think a lot of the blame lays at the feet of all of us voters because there are so few people who are really engaged and they just are looking for somebody. And I think this has been the attraction to Trump, but I think you can say the same thing about a Democratic candidate. They're just looking for somebody to solve my problems. And if they kind of sound like they're going to solve all of my problems for me and I really don't have to do anything other than to vote for them, that's about the level of commitment people have,
Yeah.
and that we've gotten to this point where people are just not engaged to the level I personally think they should be. To hey, check the facts. Do your own research. Don't believe what you hear on MSNBC or Fox or social media. Check this stuff out.
Yeah.
And so I think people have, over the last, 10, 15, 20 years, have really taken this back seat of really not accepting the true responsibility. I think we each need to accept being a smart voter,
Yeah.
or you're going to get exactly what we're getting. And that's just really not the best quality people trying to lead the country.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that though is also why, I've always been so stuck on the whole creation of a third party thing. There needs to be somebody out there that a lot of people can see and interact with, and this is goes back to the, is it better to start things locally or better to try and start things nationally?
Yeah.
And part of my thinking about why I always sort of fall back to sort of the idea of trying to start something nationally is that if you can create something that everyone can look at, then it starts giving them a choice and something to think about. Whereas if it's somebody local, I will admit that local person might have more of effect on things sooner than
Yeah.
trying to start a national campaign. But the only people that are ever going to see it are the local until he moves, starts going up in the ranks. And then that's difficult because, you don't have any kind of
Right.
support system, which is why you need the party. So it's like a chicken and the egg thing,
It
it's like
is.
you're going around and around. But like the whole concept of safe states, in this last election, it was determined by the battlegrounds, the quote unquote battleground states, right?
Right.
Which there were like 6 or 7, and everything else just didn't matter. And it's like, that's one of the things that needs to change.
Yes.
States shouldn't be safe. I mean,
Not at all.
a safe state essentially means that you have no choice.
Exactly.
And so that has to change, and it has to change in a big way. And I don't see that changing unless some new entity comes along, or one of the older entities just falls in on itself, and implodes and gives way to something new. But there's got to be something like that to really change, because this idea that one or two states decides everything is crazy.
Oh, it's the most frustrating thing about it. And it really came out. I mean, it's been coming out for the last couple cycles, but this one was just ridiculous. It's just
Yeah.
like, and again, there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it in the current framework. Nobody's going to change the Electoral College, because you got to get, what is it? Is it 60% or 75% of the states to go along with the constitutional amendment?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's never going to happen. So that's where it comes back, in my mind, to having engaged voters to to make the change, not in the sense of even changing the Constitution, but a third party kind of makes it all happen. It puts California and Texas and Alabama and New York, all of us in play, right? If they
Right.
can't depend on their particular wings, whoever they're kind of leaning towards. Although it seems like with this election, there have been cracks, in a little bit of a crack in some of that. I mean, they're pointing fingers, and I shouldn't say pointing fingers, they're just pointing towards Latino men as being,
Yeah.
kind of abandoning the Democratic Party, which is fully their right. But so there have been some cracks in it. A lot of how long it's going to last, I guess we'll see, based on what Trump does, right?
Right.
But it's in our hands to do it, and
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying on the having a national presence on that, because it gets all the attention, right, wrong,
Yeah.
or indifferent, as far as just building awareness for the need for it. And that's why I think you and I know have had hopes over time the things like the Forward Party or No Labels Party or some group like that would really kind of move this forward. Um, but they've had their own issues of trying to build the credibility that I think people are looking for.
Yeah.
Every time I bring up, I'm sure you've heard this longer than I have. Whenever I bring up, that I'm really hoping for a third party and shooting for it, people always say, yeah, but there's never any sane individual running, right? And that has been a perception issue that's legitimate. It's a
Yeah.
perception issue.
But that's what I always have said. It's like it's not enough to have a third party. The party
Absolutely.
has to represent a moderate ideology. Most of what you get from the third parties, like the two big third parties are Libertarian and Green. The
Yeah.
Greens are like the communists, basically,
Right.
and the Libertarians are basically anarchists.
Right.
Those ideologies don't really appeal to people.
No.
You need something new that comes in the middle,
Yep.
and can absorb people from the two major parties and create a base for itself. Until but it's weird. It's like I think there's just a built-in mindset.
Yeah.
If you're attracted to third parties and you're like wild crazy thinking, then you're
Yeah.
probably going to get wild crazy people in the party. So
Exactly. Yeah. No, I know. Well, and I mean, maybe that will be kind of the at the end of this rainbow after this election that there finally is enough frustration and I don't know where it's going to come from because I think it could come from either Democrats or Republicans at this point to branch off and really start bringing them together. Because I think there is when it comes to the Republicans, I think there is so much animosity towards particularly the Cheneys, not so much Mitt Romney or some of these people, but the Cheneys, I think, are a lightning rod for Democrats.
yeah,
That would be kind of a bridge too far. But I could see where moderate Democrats could work with and again, Mitt Romney's going to be kind of out of the picture pretty soon, anyways. He's aging out, kinds of things. But anybody in that world, I think people could work with because there's so much they do agree with anymore that hopefully is common sense. So I don't know who's going to blink first, whether it's going to be some of those never Trumpers and or the dissatisfied Democrats, but hopefully somebody does because more and more we talk about it and think about it. I tend to agree with you that there needs to be the kind of that national presence to give it sort of that good seal of approval that hey, this could work.
yeah. But I also think that now really is an interesting time if you're a third party advocate like me and you, then is because there is this big fracture. I mean, a lot of people during the course of this election cycle started to really voice their unhappiness with the Democrat Party.
Yep.
A lot of online voices, a lot of people, endorsed Trump at the end that you never thought they were. I mean, you can look at Tulsi Gabbard, you can look at RFK, you can look at like some of the pundits that are on the internet, like an Anna Kasparian is somebody who's a little bit famous. And it's like so all those people have sort of left the Democrats, and they
Well,
made marginal.
Even Bernie Sanders just came out and said, "Hey, the Democrats kind of got what they were asking for. I mean,
Yeah,
now in his mind, he's pushing it basically from a progressive point, but his whole point is they really did abandon the working class
yeah,
over the years, and so I mean, even a guy like Bernie Sanders is kind of got his question marks. He's already an independent, but obviously he's very much leaning towards the Democrats on most things.
but yeah. So you can see that the Democrat Party is somewhat fractured,
Oh yeah,
and the Republican Party is obviously fractured because of the Never Trumpers. So you really have essentially kind of like four groups now that are just floating around out there. You have the Democrats, left and far left, and you have right and far right. And
right.
so what happens in the next 4 years? Because if Trump goes away after 4 years, and the next person to get nominated is like Jeb Bush, then all the people who really support Trump and don't support the dyed-in-the-wool Republican types, they're all going to be homeless. And then
Right.
whatever the Democrats do, I mean, if they go way left, all the moderates are going to be like,
Yeah.
we're out of here. And if they try and go moderate, all of the Bernie Sanders way left types are going to say like, well, I'm done with this now because you've completely abandoned our whole ideology. And
Yeah.
so I think you could actually see some people sort of coalesce around like a Jill Stein from the Democrat Party, which would be an interesting thing. So I
Yeah.
think now it's more fractured than ever. So
Oh
if
yeah.
there are some people out there in the third party movement who actually have some good ideas and actually want to be involved in doing something moderate, I think this is an opportunity to get them. And
Yeah.
as far as what we're going to do after this election, as far as this podcast goes, I'm going to try and look into that a little bit. I get distracted by too many things, and I'm busy with actual life. So it's
Yep.
like I'm not always like completely focused on just messing around with the politics of our country. But I think that I'll at least have in my mind that I want to try and look at some more of the third parties and try and talk to some people about their experience within the third party. Like the reform parties is one thing, because I was reformed for a long time, but I've heard nothing from them. I don't even know if they exist anymore. So I was
Right.
going to see if maybe there's still some reform party people around, or
Right.
what they're trying to
Yeah.
do, things like
No,
that.
I do. I just think it hopefully, and again, maybe way too optimistic, but it should be a great time for things to consolidate towards the center because there's so much dissatisfaction um, you know, and I think that's going to be the quickest way to kind of right the ship because clearly, who knows? Maybe a miracle will happen and, Trump really turns the country around into this fantastic place that he claims he's going to do, but I have my suspicions. Um,
Yeah.
but, uh, you know, but at the same time, it is what it is. Accept the fact and let's move forward. And it should give all those people that are upset all the more reason to get engaged. And I
Yeah.
really, we've just really lost this within the culture. I was thinking back the other day to think that uh, back in the 60s when John Kennedy said, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. I mean, that was a Democrat saying that, right?
Yeah.
And it was like today, it's like when I was listening to, and again, I'm not Monday morning quarterback because I have no clue. But when I heard, particularly Kamala coming out with all these policy things that, we're going to build 3 million homes, and we're going to give $50,000 tax credits to start new businesses, all of which sounds great, but number one, I don't see in any realistic world how you're going to build 3 million houses in a couple of
Yeah.
years.
Who's going to build them? Who's going to manage them? What are you going to do with them?
Yeah, right. I mean, just
More complicated.
just
Yeah.
like just like Trump saying, "I'm going to start the largest deportation, and I'm going to start these major camps where I'm going to deport 10 million people." It's like, all right, let me know how that goes. Um,
Yeah.
but that's what people are hearing. And it's all about here's what we're going to do for you versus getting back to this thing about how are we going to all get together to run the country. And we've really lost that across the board. And I think it's now because we've got these two behemoths battling each other to see who can rate. What was the number I heard? This was it 15, almost $16 billion was spent on the presidential race. If I may be off a billion here or a billion there, compared to even 2006, where it was like 6 billion or something. When you
Yes.
add in all the PAC money, I mean, it more than doubled whatever it was. And it's like, well, there's a problem right there.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. Completely. It's just preposterous.
The things we could do with that money, to truly actually make some solutions, but
Yeah.
it's just it's become such an industry, the political industrial complex, and I include the media in that. I include all the politicians, and we've just let it happen as voters.
Yeah. Well, as I say, that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road. Is Trump willing to actually address some of these like ingrained and institutionalized problems that we have?
Mm-hmm.
Look at election reform. Look at DOJ reform. Look at FEC reform. Look at Department of Energy reform. Look at Department of Education reform. And because that's really where he could do something that could actually matter. But
Yeah.
you also have to do a good job of it. If you just go in there with a machete and just make a mess of things, you're not
Well,
really doing
yeah,
it.
and I guess that's always and again, I take it all sort of with a grain of salt, but uh, when and again, both sides do it. It's like Kamala saying she's going to build 3 million houses overnight.
Yeah.
Um, and then Trump aligns himself with Elon Musk, who says he's going to cut out $2 trillion. And was it JD Vance? One of them was saying, I think we can eliminate about 95% of the federal government. And it's like, okay, hey man, I'm all for smaller government. I really am. I'm
Yeah.
not it, but can we just talk about reality? Hey, if we can shrink it by a little bit, great. 95%? I don't think so.
Well, one thing Trump should definitely do, and I don't know that he will do it, is they should have an actual audit of what the government is actually spending money on, and then they should publish that so that everyone can see it. And then, maybe go from there about determining what can go where and what's redundant and what
Yeah.
can get cut and what needs to be saved. But I mean, when you start talking about slashing 95% of the government, 85% of what you slash you're going to have to put back in somehow. So it's
Exactly.
like,
No, it doesn't make it. And that's where I go. Have you seen the site usafacts.org, the thing that Steve Ballmer has? It's really interesting because it does give you a pretty good deep dive on a lot of that kind of stuff. Um, and it's, as far as I can tell, it's now it's all based on government numbers. So if you don't believe government numbers,
right.
then there's an issue. But I mean, I think a lot of it is so, institutionalized and all that. I don't particularly fear that. It's all we got basically at this point. Um, but if you go in there and look at the government spending, federal government spending, it's just amazing how little discretionary money we do have in the budget. I mean, so much is taken up by debt,
Yep.
Social Security, Medicare, those three, and then the military. And you take those, what's left? I don't know, 15, 20%. I mean, there's really not. So it's like, okay, you're good. So what part of the military and what part of Medicare and Social Security are you, and tell us how you're going to eliminate debt, which equals, I don't know, it's getting close to 35, 40% of what
Yeah.
the budget is, something like that. How are you going to cut that out when you cut 95% of the government?
Well, and that's really the thing, though. I mean, the truth is, the one thing that all presidents now should be very focused on is reducing debt, because
It's
debt has
crazy.
interest payments involved in it. It's not just that it's a sum
It's
of money that you're
crazy.
trying to pay down; it's that it's getting bigger and bigger constantly, just under its own weight.
Yep.
So, one thing that Trump should definitely do is work with Congress to find a way to start paying down the debt.
Yep.
Start running a budget surplus as opposed to a budget deficit.
Oh, yeah.
Those kind of things, theoretically, Trump, in conjunction with a Republican House and Senate, could actually do, and it could be worthwhile. Whether or not he actually does that remains to be seen.
Yep. Yep. Since they enjoy spending just as much as the Democrats these days.
Exactly. And Trump in his first term spent
Oh,
tons. He ran up a ton of debt.
yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So,
No.
yeah, going to be interesting times. I mean, I don't know. I guess I think this podcast helped me psychologically, emotionally, mentally, in many ways, working up to this because I finally gotten, to the point where, well, it when the news came out that Trump won, it didn't stress me out nearly as much as I think it stressed out a lot of people. Only in the fact that I'm not saying it's necessarily the way I hoped it would go, but at the same time, personally, only because I know we're in most likely, a few years of a lot of chaos, just because
Oh, yeah,
he
probably.
he brings chaos with him everywhere he comes. Um, but the flip side is, if Kamala had won, it would have been just a different form of chaos.
Yeah.
So pick pick which chaos you want, and this is the one we got. So, but all the
Well,
more reason, all of us that are really dissatisfied need to come to the middle.
one thing that I will say, because we're getting close to our time limit here, is that in lieu of having a third party that you could actually vote for, I think alternating the parties in power is just about the best way to go.
Oh yeah,
So one positive way of looking at Trump beating out Harris is, as long as you can constantly change the people in power, nobody gets too entrenched, nobody gets too, powerful, nobody gets to have too much authority over too many things, because every time somebody new comes in, they tear out what the other person did. So as long as you're changing the people in power on a consistent basis, you're probably going to get a lot more moderate policies. The problem is
yeah,
in places like California, for instance, where we don't change over. Eventually, you get to a point where you can't change over.
right.
And that's where the problems really come in.
Yep.
So swapping a Democrat for a Republican this time around, hey, if it's really that bad, we'll swap the Republican for a
Oh
Democrat.
yeah. Oh yeah. No. So no, totally agree. I know it's a very inefficient way of doing it, but it's our way
Yeah.
right now.
No, that's our way.
It's truly American. Oh, yeah. All
It may be,
right.
but at least it's American chaos.
That's right. Our brand of chaos. You can't beat it, man. All right. Well, we beat that one up pretty good. So we'll catch up on it next week.
Sounds good. Talk to you then.
Bye.